I understand you just had a phone call briefing potentially on what?
I was going to. Unfortunately, it's been moved to 6:30 now.
Okay.
But I will be talking to the acting secretary for Homeland Security,
Okay.
Mr. Wolf.
Okay, so you don't have an explanation from the Homeland Security Department in terms of why and what? And how?
Yeah, unfortunately, I haven't had a direct conversation yet with the acting secretary, but I plan to be talking to him shortly in my role as the ranking member of the Senate Homeland Security Committee.
Okay, so at least from what you know and what you've come to understand, on what grounds did the president make this order?
We aren't sure. The president has made the claim that there was an imminent threat that he was dealing with. However, we have not been briefed on that, and I don't expect to be briefed on that until we get back to Washington, D.C. Next week and can do that in a classified setting. But certainly that's very important information for us to know.
Okay. So then you wouldn't know any specifics on any alleged plans the leader was putting together?
We don't know, and the president has not been very specific in any of his public statements, other than that there was an imminent threat which required him to launch the strike against him. But those are questions that we hope to get answers to next week.
Okay. I guess overall, what would your reaction be to the raid that was carried out yesterday?
Well, certainly Soleimani is a bad actor. He is basically a terrorist who's responsible for an awful lot of the mayhem in the Middle East. But we are really concerned about whether or not there's a long-term strategy from the administration. What we know is that this attack certainly will likely bring some sort of retaliatory attack. My focus is on making sure that U.S. personnel are protected, our forces and our diplomatic folks are protected in the Middle East, but also to make sure we're safe here in the homeland. And as a member of the Senate Homeland Security Committee and the ranking member, that's why I'm going to be working closely with the acting secretary to make sure we're safe here at home. One thing that we do know the Iranians are particularly skilled at is cyber attacks. And I think we have to be concerned about potential cyber attacks against critical infrastructure here in the United States.
You mentioned concerns about a long-term plan. What would you want to see? What kind of plan would you want to see from this administration going forward?
Well, I think it's critical for the administration to understand as you start seeing this escalation of attacks, and now with the attack on Mr. Soleimani, that there will likely be a retaliatory action. I hope that the administration has been thinking several moves forward. You can't just react. You have to understand exactly what your long-term plan is. Certainly Iran has been a bad actor in the Middle East, and they've continued to be engaged in violent acts, and it's important to make a strong statement that the United States will not tolerate that, and certainly we'll do everything to protect our men and women who are serving in the Middle East, and that includes both military, diplomatic, and civilians. But there needs to be a plan going forward to de-escalate the kinds of tensions that we're seeing right now.
In terms of retaliation from Iran, what is your biggest concern?
I think it's uncertain as to what they could do. Certainly the rhetoric we're getting out of Iran right now is very strong, but that's just rhetoric. Hopefully it doesn't actually transfer into an actual kinetic type of attack against U.S. forces, but I think we need to be prepared for that. Certainly security levels need to be enhanced dramatically. We need to be prepared for that to occur. At the same time, the president needs to have a plan going forward and be talking to the Iranians and figuring out ways that we de-escalate these tensions so it doesn't lead to war.
From what you know right now, do you believe this attack was lawful?
It's difficult to say whether or not the attack is lawful until we have more information. All we have is the president's claims that it was a reaction to an imminent threat. But I think we want to see exactly what that threat was in order to make that kind of assessment. But I think what this also illustrates is that as Congress, we have to make sure that we are actively engaged in this process. The Constitution is very clear that the war power exists within Congress. I think it's troublesome that the president did not reach out to the congressional leaders to inform them about this attack prior to it occurring. That's the normal procedure when a president initiates some sort of attack in relation to a threat, that congressional leaders are consulted and leaders of relevant committees. That did not happen, and I think we need to look at the authorities that the president has been granted.
Do you think there'll be a point, once you're briefed on the situation and the reasoning and the decision making, that you can come to a sense that you'd be okay with the decision that was made?
I think it all depends on the facts related to why the decision was made. I think we'd reserve judgment till that happens. But certainly he was a very bad actor, somebody who is responsible for the deaths of American men and women and needed to be held accountable. But we also have to have a long-term strategy to deal with the Iranian threat on a whole host of areas.
Do you fear we're headed for war?
I certainly hope I hope we're not headed for war. I hope this can de-escalate. Certainly the Iranians need to know that we will not tolerate attacks on American personnel, and we need to be strong in making sure that they understand that. But certainly I don't think anyone wants a war. That should be the last thing that we even consider.
The President said today that this attack was to prevent a war, not start one. Do you buy that?
Well, I hope it does prevent a war, although it was a provocative action, and it's going to lead to some sort of response, very likely. That's why I think what happens in the next few days are going to be critical for us going forward.
Sure.
Does it make a difference that this guy was taken out in Iraq versus him being taken out in Iran?
I think it probably doesn't make a difference to the Iranians. He's a high-ranking official, basically the number 2 official. You would think in the United States, if it was a Secretary of Defense, for example, that was killed, what our reaction would be. It wouldn't matter where he was.
Okay, the other thing is, now that I know they heard on radio, they issued today that they want people in Iran that are Americans to get out and come home. Do you guys have like an escape plan set up to where these people can get out safe? Or is our military going to have to go into de-escalation and pull them out?
In Iraq, you're saying they're moving on to Iraq?
Iran, wasn't it?
Iraq. Yeah, Iraq. So the State Department has advised civilians to leave Iraq for their safety. I think there are advisories for other countries as well. Certainly those individuals should heed that advice, and the State Department normally assists as much as they can.
Metro Detroit is known for a fairly big population from the Middle East here. What would your message be to Michigan residents who are closely watching what's going on over there?
Well, I hope that we can de-escalate this tension. We cannot go to war. We have to do everything in our power to avoid that and try to stabilize the situation in the Middle East as much as possible. The Iranians have been difficult to deal with. They've certainly engaged in a lot of provocative activities around the Middle East, but it's time for the President to use diplomacy to reach out and work on ways to de-escalate the violence so that we don't go down a path that I think is unintended, but nevertheless could be a very dangerous path if we aren't very aggressive in trying to stop it in its tracks. And that's why the next few days are going to be so important.
Did you have any more?
I don't know, does it matter? Russia's always thrown into the mix. If they say this is cool, we agree with it, or are they like?
I have not heard any reaction from the Russians. I'm not aware of any. They may have, but I am not aware of any.
You mentioned Iran is known for their cyber attacks. How concerned are you with their cyber methods with the election coming up, when we've already had a lot of talks about the election being attacked previously?
Well, in my mind, cybersecurity has got to be our number 1 issue in terms of national security threats. Cyber attacks from Iranians, from Russians, from Chinese are occurring on a regular basis. We need to strengthen our defenses. It's what I will be talking to the acting Secretary of Homeland Security. I'm going to have a detailed discussion with him about his concern of any cyber attacks coming from the Iranians in the short term related to this incident. But I think we have to be very vigilant when it comes to protecting our election and making sure that resources are being applied to local authorities as well as national efforts to make sure that our elections are safe.